Starting us off this hour, our colleague, my friend Rachel Maddow. Rachel, you are, for me, like millions of Americans, my air traffic controller. And I want to ask you a question that you may or may not have an answer to. How do we land this plane?
Well, if I'm the air traffic controller, I think we should close the airspace because I am not the one you can count on to safely land in this environment. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of the developments, the sort of marginal developments, the things that happen on a day-to-day basis in the Trump administration, when we're looking for context, we're trying to keep our eyes on the horizon, we're trying to keep things in perspective, we have to ask ourselves, is this something that is a normal conservative Republican moment, or is this something that is a Trumpian moment, which is a complete departure from politics as we know it? And, you know, I'm glad you played that clip of President Trump saying, you know, listen, I put out a list when I was running because I wasn't a politician and people wanted to know, essentially, if I was going to pick somebody completely crazy and put them on the Supreme Court. And instead, I put out this list that was curated by Republican interest groups and conservative interest groups, and so that's why everybody should feel comfortable in who I'm going to pick. I mean, this moment would have happened under a normal Republican president. The fact that it has happened under Trump puts a different cast on it. I mean, Anthony Kennedy is why we got President George W. Bush and Bush v. Gore. Anthony Kennedy is why we have same-sex marriage rights in the Obergefell case. Anthony Kennedy is why we don't execute children in the Roper case. Anthony Kennedy is the reason we gutted the Voting Rights Act. He's the reason we have unlimited secret corporate money in politics from Citizens United. He's the reason we have the Trump Muslim ban from yesterday. I mean, I think a lot of, particularly Democrats and progressives and centrists today, will be focused on the fact that Anthony Kennedy is very probably the reason that we have abortion rights in this country. And I think within a year, abortion will be illegal in half of the United States, and because of this. And that's not necessarily a Trump issue; that's a Republican politics issue. But that's what this means.
Rachel, what are Democrats to do in this moment where they don't have control of either chamber? They don't really have any back channel to influence the president's thinking. And I would bet just about anything that Donald Trump's ignorance of American history extends to the list of decisions you just ticked off where Justice Kennedy was the deciding vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Democrats right now are facing a test because Democrats have a limiter on their behavior. They're like you're driving a stock car and it tells you that it can go 220 miles an hour or something, but then when you're actually driving it in real life, you find that it gets to a limiter. Democrats have a limiter that Republicans don't have in modern politics right now, and you might disagree with me on this, but I think that Democrats are really constrained by this idea that you should honor precedent and that you should play fair and that you shouldn't make radical departures from the way things have been done in this country for generations, if not centuries. And Republicans are unconstrained by that right now. And so when Mitch McConnell and Republicans in the Senate decided they were not going to allow President Obama to make a Supreme Court nomination, that was a Republican hardball tactic that almost no Republicans had any problem with. Democrats would have to play a similar kind of hardball now to try to keep this seat from being being a nomination and a confirmation before there's a new Senate potentially chosen and a new Senate majority potentially chosen in November. Democrats don't like to break precedent. They don't like to do radical things. But the whole reason Neil Gorsuch is there and Merrick Garland isn't is because Republicans acted so radically when Anthony Scalia died in the spring of 2016. So Democrats are going to have to figure out how hard they want to fight and whether that limiter is something that's going to keep them from hitting top speed. I think a lot of the Democratic base right now is going to expect them to all but lay their bodies on the line to stop the Senate rather than allow any nominee to go forward.
I mean, you just articulated, I think, the single most sort of underreported factor of how we ended up with a President Trump, the asymmetry with which he engages in every battle, the asymmetry of his battle against the other 16 Republicans, where the other candidates were putting up ads that tried to hew close to the truth, and he just stood up there and lied his you-know-what off. And then he faced Hillary Clinton, and she tried to engage in presidential debates and in the campaign within the, sort of guardrails, if you will, of normal political conduct. Can you just elaborate on what is available to Democrats if they're willing to be more symmetrical, to play a more Trumpian game, if you will, at this moment?
And honestly, a more Republican game. It wasn't Trump who held that Merrick Garland seat in abeyance. That was Mitch McConnell, and those were Senate Republicans, and that was the pre-Trump Republican Party, supposedly, that was doing that. And that asymmetry applies not just to Trump versus normal politicians, but to Democrats versus Republicans on stuff like this. And I think that Democrats, obviously are fighting from a position of weakness in the Senate. One of the other things that McConnell has done is he's blown up the potential of a filibuster, a minority rule filibuster for the Supreme Court nomination that resulted in Neil Gorsuch. But Democrats have the option to use, exhaust, and push to the limit every tactic that they've got to keep there from being a hearing, to keep there from being a vote, to push it as long as they can, to delay it as long as they can, in the expectation that the same sort of public argument that Republicans made, that there had to be an election before there could be any new nomination, that could be applied to what they're doing here too. I think tactically it's going to be fascinating to see if Democrats have it in them to fight that hard. I do think that the Democratic base is going to want them to fight that hard, to really try to save the court or die trying. The question for us, big picture as citizens, is when do we get back to normal? Like, once these norms break, once these mores break, how do we reassert them someday? How do we get back to being a normal country where, you get in trouble for lying and stuff, And that's a citizenship question we're going to be answering, and your son is going to be answering, and his kids are going to be answering too.
I think we'll all have to answer for that when this is long over.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.